Welcome, YouTube watchers. This is my 36 YouTube live. It's been about a minute since I was able to create content, eliminate that echo. Yes, it's been a while since I've been able to meditate, create content, and basically originate the content that you see on my YouTube lives. Please watch, like, subscribe, and share. And don't forget to comment if you're watching this, please. Comments are welcome, especially during the actual live feed. I want to talk about a few topics today, beginning with this very important novel I'm reading. After I wanted to take a 43-year-old read of Margaret Walker's 1966 novel, Jubilee, because so many things, so many reasons. She did a lot of research. She put a lot of research into it. And I wanted to see how she contextualized her own story because, Jubilee is a historical novel based on her 1965 University of Iowa dissertation, but it's based on the oral story she heard from her great grandmother, her maternal great grandmother, Margaret Duggins Ware Brown. And she was born before the Civil War. And what makes me want to read it and really finish it is to see how she, how does she, Margaret Walker, put her own family in the slavery question? To what extent did she, her people, Margaret Walker's people, have relationships with abolitionists? Because I think that's important and it's relevant. Because just like before slavery, where the country goes is determined by rather the number of serious political conversations we have. And the whole point of all this foolishness that we see in the media now is to really destroy the kind of energy and the kind of atmosphere that existed so beautifully before the Civil War. So she does a profound job of inserting her great grandmother into the heated abolitionist debates. In the book, How I Wrote Jubilee, she talked about how she had to work at, you know, she had to keep historical authenticity, but she also had to involve her great grandmother in those pressing debates. So we see the politicization, the politics, the abolitionist involvement through the main character of Randall Ware. And what makes the narrative compelling is how political her male characters are, how they're involved in not only owning their own business, but they're involved in the most radical movements in the country at the time, which were the abolitionist conversations up to the Civil War. So the way she characterizes the man who would later marry the man who would later conceive a child with Margaret Ware Duggins Brown, her great grandmother, and produce Elvira, who is the actual woman who tells young Margaret as her grandmother the stories of Margaret, who Margaret Walker names Viri, is fascinating, absolutely fascinating. And so the part I wanted to read of the novel that really spoke to me is this one where she's describing the background of Randall Ware, who is a man who, in the first interaction in an earlier part of this novel, she is told, Viri, the main character, is told by Randall that he wants to marriage her. Usually we use it as a noun, but he's using it as a verb. He's struck by her beauty, but she tells him, unless you can buy me and make me free, I will not be able to marry you. So he goes away, but she has a deep conversation with her owner slash father. And that's what's also compelling and unique about this 1966 novel. The main character is a mixed race heroine whose father is a planter, Georgia planter, and whose mother is an enslaved woman, Sister Hedda, who dies at the beginning of the novel. So you really see how she Virey goes from seeing her mom die to adolescence to witnessing the dramatic civil war, that's going to change the whole climate of the environment. It's compelling because as I'm reading it, I really see, US society in the 21st century just like the Confederate plantation, and so you see this kind of decay, this gradual decay of the economy around Virey. And for me, it's just like almost prophetic to what will happen to the economy here if it continues to go and run improperly by the people who are currently running it. In this particular part, the narrator is describing Randall Ware, and this is at the beginning of the Civil War, 1861. Margaret Walker writes, just before he was forced to leave Terrell County, he, Randall, had thought his fortunes were moving up as fast as one could hope in a place where no black man really had any form of security. But when his guardian, Randall Wheelwright, died, and Old Man Quarles was under much suspicion as an abolitionist, in in case of any direct contact with the law or some hostile planter, he would have had no redress. Any day, he could expect his status to change from free man to slave or prisoner or both. He still had his free papers, however, and although his movements were prescribed, he decided that night when his arm was grazed with a bullet that he must leave. He had hoped that Virey would follow him, but he also knew how attached she was to her babies. And he could well realize that morning in the swamps when she did not appear, that she had not obeyed his instructions after all, because he tells her to meet her in the swamp. She tells him she just can't leave the babies, nor can she run away with him with the babies. So that dramatic conflict ensues, but they find a way to reunite, albeit briefly. Walker writes, and now after going north, Randall Ware was back in the South again. Grimly, he remembered how carefully he had picked his way out of the South, traveling as a fugitive slave through the Underground Railway. And she's using the language that was used. Margaret Walker is. It was not railroad, it was railway. Charles Blockson told me that, and the service for Charles Blockson is this week in Philly. Even though he, Randall Ware, was a free man. There were days and nights when he lay hiding in a friend's barn or breathless under a haystack, when he dared not walk the streets of a strange southern town in daylight without taking the chance of running afoul of the law. Now, in the deepening night, as he stood over the campfire, companions joined him. Randall Ware, listening to these men, was moved to murmur only a few words. He spoke softly but passionately, and he said, I don't know what you think, and I don't know how you feeling. You are white folks and my people are black, but I tell you, I believe God means for my people to go free. When this war is over, we're going to be free. Just like old write-ups say, we're going to be forever free. We fighting this war to be free. We working and we dying just like everybody else. We doing all in our power in this war so we can go free. And I thought I'm also reading an interesting book. This one is by Jacqueline Carmichael about Jubilee. And a lot of people have talked about it. Well, she also mentions the same way in my previous YouTube live, Miriam McGrath mentions, the reason why Jubilee was not as celebrated as other novels by Black women because it's dealing with Christian humanism, which was not popular, which is not a theme among it was not a theme that was popular among Black radicals at the time. Um, this is Jacqueline Carmichael. This is her book of criticism, and this is a page that I found profound. What she writes about Jubilee here, commenting on Walker's major Black male characters in Jubilee. Bernard Bell describes Randall Ware as the voice of Black nationalism and radicalism in the novel. It is he who plants the idea of freedom in Virey's head, giving concrete social reality to the sermon and prayers that God would send a Moses to free her and her people. He is bitter because whites do not respect him, his rights as a free citizen, and he resists their efforts to cheat, terrorize, and emasculate him. Despite Ware's status, Walker does not falsify um, history to accommodate white sensibilities in her novel Jubilee. Her research into the post Civil War South made it inevitable that even Randall Ware's life should not go unscathed. Although he is free and literate and owns his blacksmith shop, and although he once served in the Georgia's legislature, he suffers at the hands of the Ku Kluxers. As Randall Ware warms himself over a campfire atop Lookout Mountain in Tennessee, and Missionary Ridge, his thoughts are not of the enemy. The blacksmith's mind goes back to the other days and places before the war took him from his anvil. He's a blacksmith in Dawson, Georgia, where his reverie is broken as he reunites with Jim and the dying brother Ezekiel. In the presence of an army chapel, Jim and Randall Ware buried brother Ezekiel in the winter camp of the Union Army. He has died unknown to Mr. Lincoln, his Moses. This is an example of how well Walker uses historical fact as a backdrop against which her characters play out their destinies. And she did extensive research. Margaret Walker, Mariama Graham writes that she used the University of North Carolina Southern Historical Collection along with the memory of her great grandmother's the memory of her grandmother's stories of um, Margaret Walker's great grandmother. So check this book out. It's right here, Trumpeting a Fiery Sound. Trumpeting a Fiery Sound. And the author is Jacqueline Carmichael. Getting a lot of news recently. I had gotten oh, by the way, if you are appreciating this, if you learned something from my reading, please don't hesitate to bless my Cash App. It is $ Roan Fraser. It will be most appreciated. Most appreciated. And again, subscribe, like, share, comment. Don't hesitate to comment. I'll read it right here. It's been a while since I was able to come back on this YouTube live journey. My uncle passed, and then today his sister, my aunt passed, and wow, it's been quite a journey. I said I've been meaning to put out a video before, well before my aunt passed. I was planning to see my aunt, but that didn't happen, and we're reflecting right now on the largesse of her amazing 92-year life, my aunt Annie. And what Margaret Walker's doing is inspiring me to get the fire under my butt to tell my family story because it's a fascinating story and it is incredibly relevant. I'm excited about making it relevant. Um, Came across an amazing video by um, Condola Rashad, the daughter of Miss Felicia Rashad, and she talked about the turmoil right now that is happening in Libya. And after I saw that IG story of hers, I noticed more and more articles on the turmoil, the people that are leaving, the crisis that is happening in Libya. Brought me to a book I reviewed about a decade ago. That it came out a decade ago, but I did the review about 9 years ago. And it's this book here called Global NATO and the Catastrophic Failure in Libya. It is one of the masterpieces of the amazing um, Professor Horace Campbell. Horace Campbell wrote the definitive scholarly history of Bob Marley and the philosophy of Bob Marley. Not only Bob Marley in his book Rasta and Resistance. My cousin gave me that book. The subtitle is From Marcus Garvey to Walter Rodney, and it just talks about the um, philosophical underpinnings, the Pan African beliefs of Marcus Garvey, Bob Marley, Walter Rodney. And this particular book is powerful. It's powerful because he's more or less predicting, he's dramatizing essentially the destruction of an African nation at the hands of a US president of African descent. You know, that's what makes the book. It is a historical book dealing with history, but the way he writes it, it's like this really slow, painstaking tragedy that as the reader you can only see as a painful experience for Libyan people at the hands of the West. And he's very clear theoretically. Most historians that we read, as C.L.R. James writes, are bourgeois historians. They write for a bourgeois audience. They write with a particular distance about the brutality on the ground. Horace Campbell doesn't write like that. Horace Campbell provides details in a way where he wants you to feel what the people on the ground are feeling, in a way to almost inspire you to action. Um, and I chose one particular page of his book, Global NATO and the Catastrophic Failure in Libya, because it seemed to explain what's happening this year, 2023, in terms of the absolute turmoil that's happening there, the murders, as a result of the West's plan to execute Muammar Gaddafi. And that was with Hillary Clinton as Secretary of State and Barack Obama as US President. The most powerful, profound parts and ideas of that book that I remember is Horace Campbell writing that Obama says there are no boots on the ground in Libya when the Western journalists asked directly what was happening. But there were boots, and even though they were not U.S. troops, Horace Campbell's point was saying technically Obama was splitting straws when he said that, because while there were no U.S. troops from a U.S. military directly, there were NATO troops, which is basically orchestrated by mainly the United States. So it wasn't necessarily through the United States, but it was through NATO that the US carried out its execution of Muammar Gaddafi. And what Horace Campbell writes in that book is that that happened because of Gaddafi's decision to engage resource nationalism. And he praises, as I do in my forthcoming book coming out about Tony Martin, he praises WikiLeaks. He talks about the importance of WikiLeaks in exposing um, the leaders' efforts in different parts of the world to use resource nationalism, to expand programs for the people of nations, particularly Libya. He's talking about the currency. He's talking about the plans Gaddafi had to unite the continent with the resource of oil and to use the profits of the oil to provide healthcare and education, and how that concept was threatening to the West. But I focused on a particular page of this book that really helped explain and reminded me of why there is turmoil in Libya right now because of the assassination of Muammar Gaddafi. So let me pull that up. This is in the 20th chapter. Professor Campbell names this chapter Libya All In, a culture of dysfunctionality in the US military and its explosion in the US political system. And he's talking about General Petraeus and how he was in the public describing what was happening in Libya. Campbell writes, Petraeus had been the commander of the U.S. forces in Iraq and Afghanistan at a moment in the history of the United States when military information operations were as important as weapons. According to U.S. military doctrine, this new kind of warfare there in Libya had been the struggle to control the narrative. In other words, make sure U.S. troops are not implicated, U.S. government, Western governments are not implicated in the brutality, the regime change that was happening when Gaddafi was murdered. Um, the U.S. establishment, I underline, could never control the narrative on Africa because the history of white supremacy and chauvinism precluded a clear understanding of the dynamics of self-determination. And so he's clear, and we get it in Abayomi Azikiwe's Pambuzuka news reports. We get it in his tweets. We get it from Black Agenda Report. We get it from stories that are not showing the strictly Western point of view about why this turmoil is happening because of Western involvement. Campbell writes, in the 10 years of absolute failures of the US military operations in Iraq and Afghanistan, the effort to control the narrative had involved a massive disinformation campaign aimed at US citizens. Um, this campaign had sought to present scholars such as Noam Chomsky as fringe intellectuals, and new liberal voices emerged that basically soft pedaled the torture and criminal activities of the military. I believe he gets the title of the book, Global NATO and the Catastrophic Failure, a term from, I believe, Seamus Milne. He takes it, as a way to, make it look not so bad, but the reality was it was the failure of US policy, and that explained why the Benghazi tragedy happened, where a US official was killed as a result of the US attempt to change the regime in Libya. So this explains a lot of the turmoil. Check this book out, along with every other book by Professor Campbell. He wrote an interesting book on Barack Obama's candidacy, and I had the pleasure of being on a panel at the Left Forum with him, with Jeffrey Perry, about the panel title was Caribbean Responses to the Cuban Revolution, and Professor Campbell had an awesome paper. So yeah, to read up on why what is happening in Libya is in fact happening, make sure you read this book, Global NATO and the Catastrophic Failure in Libya. Today and yesterday were the Diamond League finals, the Wanda Diamond League finals. I'm a big track star. It's such a metaphor for so much. And I want to congratulate one particular 400-meter hurdler, Rai Benjamin, on running an incredible time yesterday, 46:39. And he seems to not be able to beat Karsten Warholm, the Norwegian 400-meter hurdler who holds the world record just under 46 seconds. Um, he seems to not be able to beat him until this race. And this year, Karsten also won he speaks English immaculately. I'm always impressed when the non-American athletes can speak English better than I can speak their language. And yeah, Karsten, wow. And Jacob Ingebrigtsen also won that 1 mile run. Um, and he retained his title, very proud of him. But what was interesting about this race and important for Rai is that he can in fact beat Karsten in the final if he puts his mind to it. For me, that was the enduring lesson. This time of 46:39 is a faster time than the time Karsten won in the World Championships in Budapest. So there's nothing to it but to do it for Rai to win. And I'm rooting for Rai to get it this time as we approach the 2024 Olympic Games in Paris. Impossible is nothing. So way to go, Rai, on an amazing, amazing Diamond League finish yesterday on September 16th. I do also want to talk about that incredible runner who came in second in the mile run, and he has Ethiopian parents, and I did not realize how powerful. His name is Yared Nugus. He ran 3:43, and he came in just behind Jakob Ingebrigtsen. Um, and wow, what a promise! What a promising career! I look forward to Yared running in the Olympics. I wonder what he'll run in the Olympics because he set an American record in the mile yesterday, 3 minutes 43 seconds. That's incredibly fast. Way to go, Yared. Okay. And then today, another personal best from this amazing tall runner like me. What's fascinating about Hansle races is that he always gets a slow start because of his height. But by the middle and by the end, he's leading And so the same thing happened in this race. But what made this race unique and awesome to watch for me was to notice how in the seventh, well, really it started at the eighth hurdle. Hansel really caught a strong groove and was accelerating. It was awesome to see. And he did something differently in the seventh, eighth, and ninth hurdles in this particular race on September 17th that he's never done before. And it showed because he ran a personal best time, which I believe was 12. Um, I believe it was 1293 or 1296. So congratulations to Hansel on your personal best. The sky's the limit. Speaking of the sky's the limit, Armand Mondo Duplantis in the pole vault, 6 point. Wow, what it was some world record that was at least zero point 0.2 meters higher than the world record he earned, just like Karsten. He beat his own world record, and so we're seeing Mondo beat his own world record, uh, um, performing for Sweden, 6.23 meters. That's incredible. The sky is the limit. So we have people breaking absolute records here. It was a record-breaking uh, Diamond League final. It's a record break. It's the end of the season, the end of the 2023 track and field season. So we'll see. Um, I'm proud of Elaine Thompson era for running a season's best at the end of the season at a time of 10:79, behind Marie Jose Talu in the 100-meter final. And congratulations for Sharika to earning that Diamond League final title in the 100-meter and the 200-meter. I know she was aiming for the world record, but don't aim for the world. Just aim for your best all the time, Sharika, and let the world record come naturally. Let that world record come naturally. Congratulations to Sharika. I also want to take this time at the end to celebrate my aunt Annabelle, my grandmother's sister, a very powerful, powerful, strong influence. She was one of the first people I knew to have cable television when cable television was a thing. We used to fly. She had an apartment in West Palm Beach, and then she had a house. But before she moved into the house, she had a big restaurant where she cooked Jamaican black cake. Every time I visited her, probably visit her like 5 or 6 times because me and my parents lived in Wesley Chapel, is where I grew up, and then we would drive to West Palm, and I would ask mom and dad, "Are we going to the restaurant?" And they're like, "She closed that." But every time we would go to her house, I would still ask, "Are we going to the restaurant?" Because the most beautiful memory I have is just being in a restaurant and eating. It was a great time of fellowship, and even if it's not in the restaurant, Aunt Annie loved to cook. She was an amazing cook. Curry gourd. The best, most memorable thing Aunt Annie make is black cake. My favorite thing Aunt Annie make is black cake. She make the best black cake. And I remembered for the first time seeing Whitney Houston's video, I Want to Dance with Somebody. And I think it's so beautiful. My cousin, when he got to visit her, I believe in May in Jamaica, and sent the family this photo. It's so beautiful. This is her last dance. And anytime I see the video, I Want to Dance with Somebody, at the very, very end, I start crying, because, in those days when you watch music videos in the 80s, you'd have to wait days or weeks until you see it again. But now we can see it all the time. But this image, just reminds me I want to dance with somebody. And the fact that Aunt Annie is wearing red, my grandma loved this song, Lady in Red. I remember my grandmother saying how she loved this song, by Chris DeBurge. And it made me think when I saw this photo of Aunt Annie dressed in a red dress with her nephew, Dwight, her brother's son. So I'm just grateful for her life. Very smiling, positive, loving, a very loving, giving woman. My Aunt Annabelle was a very, very loving, giving woman. And I look forward to reuniting with her sons, even though it's not under the best circumstances. It would Sons and daughter. Aunt Bev is her um, daughter, a very, 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 very loving relative. I look forward to seeing. So rest in peace, Aunt Annie. This concludes my YouTube 36 YouTube Live. Please like, share, and subscribe. And if this blessed you, bless up Mikesha, please. And thank you. Have an amazing day. Keep reading and keep the faith.